France was in a state of disarray throughout the late 1700s due to the heavy taxation of the peasant class imposed by the government. This taxation system, referred to as the Old Regime, heavily impacted the lower and middle classes, but the wealthy remained relatively unaffected. The government had also made it difficult for the lower classes to gain access to justice, preventing them from receiving fair treatment. Hunger and malnutrition were rampant as prices for food rose higher than people's wages, and the gap between the wealthy and the poor widened. The government also allowed aristocrats to remain free from taxation, further widening the divide between the two socio-economic classes. Enlightenment thinkers also began to challenge traditional religious authority, promoting the idea of human rights and a more egalitarian society. As financial difficulties mounted, the French citizens who had the most to lose from the inequality began to band together in protest and formed the Third Estate. The Third Estate was a unified political force that acted as the representative voice for the suffering common people. Meanwhile, the government's response to the protesters was to increase taxation and repress any calls for reform. The citizens began to grow more vocal in their disapproval of the government's policies, and the monarchy attempted to silence them by force. Tensions between the government and the people continued to rise, and in June of 1789 the people stormed the Bastille in a move that would become known as the start of the French Revolution. The government's response was to declare a state of emergency, suspending rights, and ordering the militia to disperse the crowd. The people refused to back down and sought out justice for their grievances, eventually culminating in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. The declaration was meant to highlight the importance of universal and human rights and to ensure that the government would recognize them. The peasants continued to organize and protest, and the government was soon forced to concede to their demands. This paved the way for a new form of government, one that was based on the rights and freedoms of the people. With this new government came sweeping reforms, including the abolition of feudalism and the establishment of universal suffrage. The French Revolution also marked the end of the monarchy and ushered in a new era of liberty for the people of France. The French people, now liberated from oppressive government rule, soon began to demand greater freedoms and rights for all citizens. Despite the violence that accompanied the revolution, it was a necessary step in the development of democracy and human rights. The revolution was able to successfully overthrow the absolute monarchy of Louis XVI and seek out a more equitable form of government. The revolutionary spirit spread throughout Europe as other countries sought to follow France's example and establish their own democratic governments. The ideas of the French Revolution, such freedom, liberty, and the inalienable rights of citizens, are still seen in many modern democracies today. In the years following, other enlightened nations would also begin to embrace these ideas and establish their own forms of democracy. The uprising in France was largely motivated by the government's refusal to recognize the rights and freedoms of its citizens.